Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. Today, we welcome Dr. Dawn Refsell from Corteva Agriscience to our weekly seminar. Dr. Refsell received her BS in agronomy and master's degree in crop production in physiology from Iowa State University and her PhD in agronomy from Kansas State University. In 2003, she began her career as an extension weed specialist at the University of Illinois. Dr. Refsell moved to industry in 2009 with Valent as a field market development specialist. In 2020, Dr. Refsell joined Corteva Agriscience as the Midwest Commercial Unit Field Science Leader. And currently, Dr. Refsell is the Soybean Senior Crop Trait Development Lead. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Dawn Refsell.
Good afternoon. I will fall asleep as much as all of you know. So thank you for inviting me here today. I am probably going to give you the most atypical seminar you've had in a while.
Full screen.
Sure, make it full screen, Brian.
I can only try.
Okay. And so I'm going to take a little different approach to a seminar, right? So in my introduction, you heard what I do. What I do is so confidential. I can't tell you, like, give a seminar about what I do in my day-to-day. But what I can give you a seminar about is my experiences throughout my career and how that translates to what I do in my day-to-day, right? And so my crazy idea that I came up for this seminar is beyond the books, right? Thinking about all of you, it's a predominantly student audience. How do we go beyond the books? What are you learning in class and how do you translate that into your future and what you can use in real life or your career, right? Because we all live in real life. So going beyond the books, right? Lessons from weed science, because in the end, I was a weed scientist. All right, so we're gonna start with my roots, how we define a weed, what makes a weed, and then wrap up with a little conclusion, all right? So my roots, do not shy away from the fact that I grew up on a grain and livestock farm. Little me and my mom would attest that this is a pineapple weed, and still to this day, pineapple weed is my favorite weed. I love that plant. And so I would pull it all over our yard and drag it around with me, along with the little kitties. Livestock wise, our farm was, we had farrow to feeder pigs. So had a lot of work there. And then we also had cattle. When I got older and was in 4-H, I had my own sheep herd. I sold that sheep herd to pay for myself to go to college. So I knew livestock in and out, but I knew all the work. And I was like, I am not going to school for animals. Animals are for fun in my life. I'm going to go for school to plants because plants don't talk back. They don't have emotions. We're okay. So given all that, where I am today, I still farm. So these are two of my little cows up here. This is Mabel and Maisie. And so they are both mini cows and they are my lawn puppies, let's say. They love me. And then, this is a quote that I like to share a lot. I've used it for a long time, but this is what keeps me grounded, right? I am always trying to make sure that what I'm doing is what's sustainable for farming, right? We have to be able to produce food for the next generation, and everything you do should be grounded in what you're doing for the next generation. So that's my roots. So we're going to get into a little science. So what is a weed? Brian, you can't answer this, or none of the weed science students, but think in your head, what is a weed? What is weed science, right? The science of weed. Well, first you have to know what a weed is before you know what the science of it is. And then who are these weed science people that study this plant that we create this name for? So the origin of weediness in plants. This is from 1964, I believe. But weeds have been around for a long time. And this is my favorite definition. Everybody has their own definitions. But organisms become weedy when they start to compete with man for a habitat he is creating for himself. That alone should describe a lot of our own interactions with others around us and with our careers, right? a habitat, right? How you interact with others. It's self-created, right? You're interacting with another human. But they become true weeds when they become adapted to the permanently disturbed habitat, right? So you have to have disturbance, chaos, right? Not everything's the same. And how do you work with that? So commonalities in this paper related to weedy traits, phenotypic flexibility, adaptation to a wide environmental tolerance, adaptation to man-made disturbed habitats, and then weeds form a part of a colonizer, right? So coexistence, being able to exist with something else. We can go a step further, and the next year, this is the baker's list of weedy traits, and I hope every weed science student in this room has seen this list before. But there is a nice list here of weedy traits. There is not a single species that exhibits all of these traits. I have omitted the perennial characteristics, right? You can't be an annual and a perennial at the same time. So that's why there is nothing that exists that manages all of it. There's something that comes close, and we're going to talk about it. But there is a lot of characteristics. So how do you define a weed and what makes a weed characteristics? I hope you've read all these, but I can boil it down to 3, right? If I lump them together, adaptation, reproduction, and competition are 3 drivers of weedy species. How does that relate to all of you? Well, adaptation, that's resiliency. Reproduction, that's your network. And competition is how you differentiate yourself, right? When you're competing with someone, ultimately what you're doing is separating yourself, right? So you're differentiating from the other one. So I took those weedy characteristics of Baker, boiled it down to 3, and now I've applied it to all of you. So what do we got? Adaptation and resilience. I go back to my first semester as an undergrad. I took a weed science course. And I remember we walked across campus, and the thing that we were told to do was to observe the dandelions. So dandelions that were growing next to the sidewalk, the dandelions that were getting trampled in the cross paths that we had created ourselves, right? The shortcuts across campus, the little wild areas. Look at all these dandelions, right? How have they still exist, right? You could walk across the parking lot, there'd still be a dandelion. This is a crazy weed, right? This thing lives everywhere. So my weed science, state experience started with a dandelion. So we're gonna go back to the beginning of making sure everybody's on the same page of taxonomy, Taraxacum officinale, and then making sure we know our structures, because I'm gonna show you some data, and you have to know the structure of a dandelion in order to understand the data. So we have the peduncle, stem, leaves, right? Very scientific name here. The inflorescence, and then we have the structure of the seed dispersion. I'm going to challenge whether dandelion is really a weed or not, though, because it is edible. You can make some good salad out of dandelion. It is medicinal. It is pollinator friendly, and it does provide soil stability. So again, is it really a weed? We'll debate that. So going back to the peduncle, this is a study that was just published. I'm like, man, we looked at this stuff 25 years ago as a student, and I could have published this stuff, but I missed out apparently because someone just did it. So we look at in the wild, right? This is a wild biotype of dandelion. We have lawn dandelions, and then we have playground, very consistent. In every one of these graphs, I'm going to show you those 3 habitats. So we can associate with that. But look at how these dandelions have behaved and evolved in each one of these scenarios, right? So the floral peduncle, right? The stem that holds that floral inflorescence. Look at how much taller it is sitting out there in the wild versus under the playground or the lawn. Quite interesting. Look at the floral peduncle angle, right? How does it sit relative to the ground? Very drastically different. Leaf and inflorescence, right? We can see the same thing in the leaves. The leaf size has changed. The inflorescence diameter has changed. This plant is evolving, right? Changing to the habitat that it exists in. So the ultimate question is, okay, what's going on? What is the learned experiences that a dandelion has? So the leaf shape and size has changed. We have the root growth. I didn't show that data, but the root growth changed also. And then the floral structure changed. And so the behavior exists within this genome for it to adapt and evolve. How does that apply to all of you? That's the question, right? So we can keep going. Adaptations for effective dispersal. Everybody's done this, right? Took a dandelion head, blown on it. Whoa. We have wind dispersal, it has water dispersal, animal dispersal, and then human, right? When you go and blow on that. This is a great weed that disperses itself and it is very adaptive. What about you in your careers, right? That was my challenge to all of you. Where do you see plasticity, right? When you are in a playground or along the side of the sidewalk or in the grass or out in the concrete, wherever those dandelion seeds fall, how are you adapting? And so in your career, think about what crops you're studying, what pests you're evaluating. Are you in agronomy, breeding, ecology, genomics? I'm an ecologist. Where are you going to work? Right? What's your flexibility in where you're going to live? Are you going to work in research, marketing, business, commercial, extension, teaching? You can be a people leader or administrator, right? This is all plasticity, right? For you to think about in your career of how you're adapting and evolving through your experiences. This morning I was asked about whether I wanted to work in academia or in industry or in government. I can't go backwards, right? I've done both, but what I can tell from that learned experience, from that plasticity, is that those are different type of individuals. And so if you're consciously aware of what type of individual you are or what your breadth or your plasticity is within your own genome, that can help shape to who you are. So we have I-shaped employees. And I would say traditionally from an academic structure, you are very I-shaped. You find a subject matter and you dive in and become that deep subject matter expert. A T-shaped employee, you have deep technical knowledge in one area, and then you tend to develop broad knowledge across the range. So this is where you're dangerously knowledgeable in a broad space, right? But you're very knowledgeable in a deep space. So many of you have mentioned a field sciences role. This is like a field sciences role. We would hire you in a specialty space, but you have to work across platforms, right? You have to work entomology, plant pathology, agronomics, right? In addition to, let's say, the weed science part. You can't just be buried into one. So this is where a T-shaped employee comes. New shapes, let's say, that we've been working on are the M-shaped employee, right? So you have deep knowledge in multiple areas, but then you have shallow knowledge in a broad range of areas. I would say this doesn't have to make a perfect M. You can kind of move that little bar down every once in a while. But this is a unique person also to think about where's your plasticity, right? Is your plasticity on here or is it in the vertical range of how you're developing? And then we have V-shaped employees, and they tend to be gradually broadening in adjacent areas. So you tend to be more trajectory. And then they may still be deep knowledge in one area. So there's different ways, like when we're talking about employees or what your preference is on what career path you want to take, this is a way to reflect on that. How do you want to learn, right? Do you want to stay deep knowledge in one area? Do you want to stay deep knowledge in multiple areas? And then how do you want to learn the breadth of the knowledge? So something to think about and test your plasticity and how you want to work in your career. All right, so some other life lessons for you from the plasticity story of the dandelion. Adaptability over perfection. Failure always happens, right? Do you think the dandelion seed always lands on the perfect spot? No, right? So it has to adapt. Go to flexibility, not flawlessness. Allow yourself to fail. Plasticity in nature, this allows weeds to survive, right? They're adjusting to constant changing environments. That's how a weed got its name, right? It has adapted and evolved to that changing habitat. And then making sure that you can pivot, right? From that real life example, being able to adapt, to be resilient, to when something doesn't go your way, that you can pick yourself up and keep going, right? So very important life lessons from a dandelion. So final point on the dandelion story, change is inevitable, much like evolution. We consider ourselves scientists. As a scientist, we have to believe in evolution. Don't get so hung up on the change when change is truly evolution, okay? So change your perspective. We are now talking evolution. It is not change. Okay, next project. So I went way back. This is a nice picture from my undergrad research project. And so I worked on monarchs and milkweeds, right? And their partnership. So this is from 1999. This is an actual digital image of a slide from a the projector carousel slide, right? In my career, I had one presentation that I had to use that old carousel. The students are like, what is she talking about, right? It was a little carousel and you had to put all your little slides in there. And talk about agility and adaptability. If you put your slides in upside down or out of order, you just had to keep rolling, right? I can see heads nodding in the back. That was your agility and adaptability back then. But now they're all digital and you can change everything on the fly. But I thought it was pretty cool back then. I got that little caterpillar in on top of my slide. So that was my modern ad. So I worked on the occurrence of common milkweed in cropland and adjacent areas. And you're like, why? Well, you should all know that the monarch is codependent on milkweed species. Why is that? What does the milkweed provide? Does anybody know the chemical? Cardenaloids, ever hear of it? Okay, so they are codependent, right? The milkweed provides a chemical called cardenaloids. The cardenaloid is what the monarch larva consumes, and it is nasty to birds. So that's why the birds don't like to eat the monarch caterpillars, is because they have this cardenaloid that's provided by the milkweed. So it's a great relationship, right? Because then you turn around and that monarch butterfly then helps pollinate and helps spread the milkweed. So great symbiotic relationship, codependency. So if you don't follow monarchs, you should follow monarchs and the milkweed story. And so going back to this time in 1999, there was concerns that the herbicide-resistant corn and soybean crops could devastate the monarch food supply. This was a publication in Science. So this stemmed the research that I did as an undergrad looking at this population. And so this was the onset, right? We had already started in on all the Roundup Ready soybeans at this time. What was Roundup going to do to the milkweed? Still have beans showing up, I guess. Okay, so I went out, surveyed every county in the state of Iowa. So we have different habitats: roadside, road crop, pasture, CRP, other. We have different years from 1999 to 2001. And just in these 3 years, right, you can look at this percentage of sites infested with milkweed went down. So did we see an effect, let's say, right up here in the row crop, where would you perceive that Roundup Ready crops had an influence on milkweed? You could probably piece that together, right? But look at the stability that exists in these non-disturbed places. If we dig in further, right, the number of milkweeds in each one of those spaces, right? This is on a meter square per hectare. There really wasn't that many milkweeds in those spaces to begin, right? Most of the milkweeds exist within the roadside. They're in CRP or they're in other habitat, right? So there is just this little spattering of milkweeds that exists there. We dug in deeper on this non-disturbed habitat since we found that's where we're at. It was where the milkweeds were at. Different sites, different levels of infestation, and then again, the concentration of milkweeds in these spaces. So what is this correlation, right? Well, if you find milkweeds, what else are you gonna find? You guys can talk. Monarchs, right? cohabitat, right? So our results supported that the milkweed was more prevalent in these non-disturbed areas. And the percentage of corn and soybean fields infested with common milkweed had declined, right, over this time. So did it impact the monarch population? No, because the biggest significant impact on the monarch population is the overwintering site in Mexico. We can do a lot of work up here to increase the milkweed presence. And we have done a lot of work even since this time to increase the number of milkweeds. But the overwintering site, it has the greatest impact on the inflow and outflow of the monarch. All right, so this relationship, again, going back to the mutual dependency, right? There's a reproductive dependency. You will not get a monarch unless you have a milkweed, right? One cannot exist without the other. The preferential habitat for the milkweed obviously is in the undisturbed places. But we also found out through this study is the reason that they do like to use the corn and the soybeans is that it provides shelter, right? So there is a little bit of a shelter effect from having a milkweed within a corn plant or within a soybean canopy. So it's a little bit of a pest host predator avoidance. Again, the pollination assistance, but it is a great symbiotic relationship. So that's where we're gonna dig in on this presentation, right? Building professional network. You need to make sure that they are mutually supportive, right? When you talk about building your network within the people that you interact with and others, I would say your career depends on this, right? Building relationships. Teamwork does make the dream work, right? I would love to hear a story otherwise, but teamwork makes the dream work. And find a mentor. Mentors are critical at any point in your career. Whether you are just getting started as a grad student, early career, mid-career, late career, even needs mentors. I know of two gentlemen that have retirement mentors. And so, you got to help somewhere and anywhere along the line. Fostering trust. Reciprocal relationships, right? Going back to the symbiosis is essential for long-term professional success. Consistency, transparency, listening, vulnerability, and respect. That's my summary on how you build trust, right? These are the key components. So if you're looking at how you build trust with somebody, that's your way to do it. And then obviously your network is important in creating opportunities. So these reciprocal networks, they open doors for new positions, right? For me, it was recruiting interns, new employees, fact checking on, hey, can we do a research project with this person? How credible is their research? Right? There's all sorts of value that you can find within your network. I would also encourage you to engage beyond the books. Steering and getting the best grade point on your books is one thing, but we need you to be able to interact, right? And build that network. That is so critical to engage beyond the books. Be engaged outside of your project itself. How are you interacting with other teams, other people around campus? Very important. So yes, your network is equally important as your credentials. If I look at your resume and is all academic, you did this, this, and this, but you did have no interaction outside of that. I see no engagement. It's a very hesitant for me. And so I will investigate that area, right? Into a network. So many conversations today. I bet most of us have found a lot of commonalities, right? People I had never talked with before. Within 2 minutes, we had found somebody that we both knew, and so we could have a conversation, right? So network is critical. All right. Competition and differentiation. Any guesses what this plan is? What is it? Of course, all right. It hasn't changed much in 20 years, has it?
Doesn't look like it.
Doesn't look like it. Okay. So in 1913, this is in the geological Iowa Survey of Weeds. This statement is straight out of my master's thesis. Water hemp was found along the watercourses and marshes and concluded that the plant was not long present in well-cultivated fields. Can you believe that? 1913, water hemp existed in Iowa as much as it probably did here in Indiana. But no one saw it as a threat, right? So this is Hartzler, who was my advisor at the time, surveyed the extension weed specialists around the Midwest and asked them, when did water hemp become a problem? And these are the years that they gave them. So we look at that, mid-1980s, we can blame everything back to Missouri, right? Yes. So Missouri became the epicenter of where water hemp cut loose, let's say. So let's examine why water hemp cut loose. So this is the data that I have dug up prior to 1996, 1989, 1998 to 1999, and then 2003. I know these are super old years. They have huge impact. What was prior to 1996 to say? No Roundup, right? These plants had never seen Roundup in their life. 1999 to 1999, they'd seen a couple years of Roundup use, right, on just the soybean acres. And then we get into 2003 and we're going, right? We are into the full rotation. But if we look, they were all, these were all treated with water hemp with glyphosate. And what do you notice? What stands out? It didn't matter, right? There was already a genetic existence within this population to tolerate glyphosate. It's pretty crazy, isn't it? Okay, so that pre-1996 water hemp population, here's 5.5 ounces of Roundup looking at it. Look at the variability in response. It's pretty neat, isn't it? Okay, so the basis for variability for glyphosate back then, back my master's time, right? Environment and genetics. We could attribute the heredity to glyphosate response only a quarter of the time, right? So the genetics existed within the plant that account for that variability a quarter of the time. Right now I work in traits. If we look at corn heritability, yield, we can control that, 15%, year number 20, height 45, and plant height 55, right? So it's pretty interesting, right? If we want to talk about the genetics to a herbicide response, it's only 0.26. Look at what we can control in a corn plant. Okay, what else changed? We had the selection pressure from glyphosate. What else was big environmental shifts that happened? This is the water hemp emergence pattern. I don't know why I decided not to fully show. You can see, right? It's got a big spread, right? Well, the adaptation of no-till occurred. We started not disturbing the soil. As a farm girl, I had the pleasure of riding the bean bar. I had the pleasure of walking fields and pulling this plant, hence my motivation to go to school to figure out how to get rid of this weed or why it was here, because I did not like doing that. Like, why did it just appear and why do I have to keep walking all these fields for my dad to take care of this plant? We had started using no-till, right? We were encouraged to use no-till, but at the same time when we used no-till, we caused a shift, right? So we increased the amount of water hemp that we saw on our field because we went to no-till. So we have tillage, tillage changes, we have resistance changes. Anything else going on? This plant is just crazy plastic, right? It has such genetic variability. So this is looking at row spacing. We have 15-inch, 30-inch row spacing. This is my corn data from my master's degree. So we have survival, right? So if these emerged with the corn plant, and you didn't control them, you still got, you know, around 80% survival, right? But the later they emerged, right, going back to the emergence pattern, this plant figured out that it wants to emerge at the same time as the crop, right? It's not gonna emerge later. So when it emerges with the crop, it can wreak some havoc, right? So very competitive. I'm gonna remind you that it grows very fast, right? So biomass wise, right? Dry weight in grams, we're talking 25, 30 grams of dry weight coming out of a plant. That's competing with corn. There's a direct correlation from the amount of biomass this plant can produce to the amount of seeds. What's important here is this is thousands. There is up to water hemp, very few plants did we work with or study produce seeds in the thousands. Take a velvet leaf plant for example. How many seeds on average do you think a velvet leaf plant produces? Maybe at most 100, 200 if it has no competition. And that's still a big velvet leaf plant. Cocklebur, perceived very competitive. How many cocklebur seeds do you get? Not very many, right? We're talking plants that don't produce thousands of seeds. And now we have this plant species that is just blowing up, that's throwing seeds everywhere. Prolific as heck. All right, so water hemp, very productive. When we compared to what it did in corn and soybeans, it still got away with murder, let's say in soybeans, right? We could use corn to suppress it a little, but it still could still wreak some havoc. Anything in corn after V5 shouldn't affect yield, but what does it still do? Contributes to the seed bank. This is, seed bank research really wasn't a thing until we started getting into water hemp, right? Like this opened up a whole channel. We've talked about dormancy and weed management. We never really talked about how absolute control impacted the seed bank because now we're throwing thousands of seeds. So if you still survived, and I tried finding my picture, I had a water hemp plant that had one little leaf, but it had 2 seeds on top of it. And I'm like, it did its job, right? Its job was survival and it wanted to reproduce and I'll be dang, it did, right? So it had contributed back to the seed bank. The need for season-long weed control, that long germination pattern, narrow spacing helped a little. We needed to push plant populations and then we needed herbicides with residuals. None of this has changed in 20 some years, right? That still holds true to today. So water hemp, competitive, how does it stand out, right? We talked about resistance. We talked about, what else have we talked about? The adaptability, the seed production, right? We talked about the rapid growth rate, 1 to 1.5 inches a day. Again, I can't get over the prolific ability of it, right? That was a game changer when we talked about weed ecology, right? We went from tens to hundreds to thousands. The reproductive timing and dispersal. The best dispersal unit that we can have is a combine, right? It didn't rely on wind. It didn't rely on animals. It relied on the farmer going through the field. And as soon as it cut those beans or cut the corn, it just dispersed the seed for it, right? Why not? So pretty smart plant. Population growth, that optimizing reproduction and dispersal, it just allowed it to dominate, right? Perfect timing, perfect niche coming out. And it's a very competitive resource efficient, right? It's a C4 plant. So from a agronomic perspective, it's got a lot going for it. So going back to that initial list I showed you all, the evolution of weeds and what are the ideal characteristics, it comes close, right? So if you're gonna stand out, right, you're gonna try to check all these boxes. So water hemp comes pretty close to checking all these boxes. Okay, so why stand out, right? Standing out in competition, unique skills, perspectives, right? We don't want everybody to think the same, right? when I go to hire somebody, I don't want to hire somebody just like me. The odds are I'm not going to, right? My experiences are my own, right? My strengths are my own, right? My experiences have built who I am, right? I don't want you to come to me and tell me, I want your job. Well, you can't, right? Because it's mine. And my experiences have got me, like, it's designed around who I am, right? And you will find that your job does do that, right? Your job evolves to who you are and what your skills are. So why is it also important? It's a niche for funding and capabilities, right? When you have something unique and you stand out, then you can bring all these things in. And diversity in thought wins over and over again in business and in research. It has been shown that diversity in thought outweighs everything else in regards to bringing a winning solution. So diversity in thought, very important. Creating new opportunities, right? Differentiation, new career paths, right? Going back to the plasticity that you can find in yourself. That's career opportunity. Think of what you have experienced, what you haven't experienced, and go do it. Again, your strengths are your own. All right. So in summary, we've talked about those 3 weedy traits that I've narrowed everything down to. So adaptation becomes resilience. It's weeds are resilient. People are resilient. You have to build that resiliency. Think in yourself retrospectively. How do you adapt, right? How do we teach ourselves to overcome challenges and move forward? Networking and growth, symbiotic relationships, mentorships, how you interact with others, how you engage with others, build out your network. It is critical at every point in your career, not only your career, but outside of your career, right? Some of my best friends are people that I have found at work, and they still stay with me to this day, right? And then standing out from the crowd, right? Everybody was born to stand out. Embrace it, right? Don't be like everyone else, right? Differentiation is critical to your success. So with that, thank you for inviting me here today. I have my email up here, my LinkedIn profile. A question that I was asked is, what books would I recommend? My favorite Brené Brown book is Dare to Lead. I had to go back and think about it, but that book encapsulates a lot in regards to leadership, not only from being a people leader, but just leading in general, right? It's just a good human book. The next book is Noise. And as a student, there may be a lot of things going on. As a professor, in my job, lots of things going on around you. Noise is a great book to help focus and get rid of the noise so you can do what you are tasked to do or what you need to focus on. And then the third book up here I have is Decision Quality. I'm in the middle of this one, let's say. It's a different scope on things that what goes into decision making and how do I help influence others and bring others along on making decisions. You all make decisions every day, right? And so I'm like, I'm gonna throw it up here because so far it's been a good read. So those are my 3 recommendations for books that I was asked. So with that, any questions? None?
I have one. Could you expound a little bit? You mentioned that diversity of thought seems to be the best way to build a team. How would you go about assembling a team with diversity in thought?
How do I do it?
Yeah.
Or
I want, like, how would you do it? And then how do you think it's viewed? How would you go about assembling a team?
So there's many ways that you can slice the diversity of thought, right? In one of our conversations today, we talked about a DISC analysis, right?
Mhm.
And so I have taken a lot of people leader training and leadership training. And so rather than having to make every one of you take a DISC analysis and then categorize you, I can somewhat ask you a couple questions and navigate and like kind of know where you would sit. So there's many different analyses that you can do, but understanding more about yourself, right? And figuring out who you are. So I don't want to put together a team, let's say, of all drivers from a disc analysis. We would get nothing done because everybody's going to want to lead the team, and then you're never gonna do the task that needs to be done, right? And so that's why you spread that diversity around to the different aspects of things. So there's plenty of LinkedIn learnings that exist, let's say, in regards to understanding like some simple questions that you can ask individuals to understand, to kind of see where they sit on the different spheres, shapes, whatever, circles, analysis of things, and then making sure that you find representation when you go to build a team from each one of those. So not necessarily even from a business standpoint, oh, I have to have somebody from commercial and marketing and R&D and regulatory. That's happenstance, right? Like that's expected, but having the analytical person that's maybe sitting in marketing that may see it differently than this person, right? So making sure you're seeing the bigger picture, let's say, rather than digging on really what the title is. Brian,
You can go with the student first.
go.
So, thank you so much for your presentation. I love that it was like this story of your studies and also like adding information for us that is super beneficial. So I was thinking about whenever you were talking about having mentors and having a relationship that will be symbiotic.
Yes.
I'm trying to think like, well, how I can help you, like,
That is a great question.
you can help me.
Absolutely.
But how I can add value to you.
How you add
Or-
value to
or
me?
No, add
Can
value.
be-
What I mean is not.
How does it
but-
become symbiotic?
Symbiotic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not a student anymore, right? I don't know what, like, things change through time and experiences, right? So having the relationship from a mentorship is understanding what is important to you, right? So in that next generation that I'm not part of, that relationship, I can understand, okay, this is generationally what your priorities are, and help me see through your lens, right? Rather than you seeing my lens, right? So there is the reverse to that, right? So being able to see what's important to you and to your generation is the biggest win, right? Because I'm not of your generation. I haven't had the same experiences you have, right? I didn't go through, my experience with COVID is very different than all of yours. Right? It was a vacation for me because I wasn't in a plane for once. So, my interaction with people became different, but it didn't affect me the same way it did you. And so having that reverse understanding is very important.
So we have students from a lot of different disciplines in the room,
Yeah.
and they all have different paths, about when they start graduate school, even some undergrads here today, and when they finish, and then when they're, career ready. And you talked about, well, you need to have a lot of networking and, build that network and, develop your professional skills. Could you take us through like a calendar year and just share, what would be your expectations? Like, this is a good gauge because some students might go to conferences a lot, others maybe not so much. There's different types of networking and, where's the bar, I guess, in terms of what your expectation would be or recommendation for the level of all that?
Engagement in scientific societies is important, right? Because that's really truly a recognition of external engagement, right? Getting your name beyond the institution that you're in, right? And I would say even beyond a departmental level, right, is important. So be known within your department, right? So I have, if I can pick up the phone and call the department chair and they don't know who you are, that's like, okay, why do you not know who the student is, right? Have they, like, what do you, I got a question, what have you been doing, right? Like, I'm sure your professor knows who you are, but come on, get out. Like, like I walked by the Hort Garden, right? It's beautiful, right? Get out and walk around. But, engagement, society, right? If we want to go high level, right? Let's see some engagement in the society. Regional societies are perfectly fine. I got my start as a regional society, right? Participating there. That's how going back to network, that's how Brian and I know each other, right? It's from Weed Science Network, right? The Weed Science students in here, it's how I know them. I've gone to APS, I've gone to ESA, and I can make those connectivities also, right? And so society network, I find very, very valuable. Interdepartmental presence, going to other seminars, right? Participating and viewing seminars in departments that may not be your own is also important. So that's from a college level, right? Kicking it up there. What are you doing on campus, right? How are you engaging around campus beyond just the science part of it, right? How are you helping other students? What are you doing off campus, on campus? It doesn't always have to be even academically important, right? What are you doing in your community? Right? While you're here, you're living here, right? So what are you doing from a community standpoint? So think of the impact then that way. So is there an expectation through a calendar year? It's when you have time. And I know from a academic standpoint that your professors would probably all like you in there working all the time, but you do have to find balance, right? And if you don't find that balance while you're in grad school, it is only going to get worse, right? So I shouldn't have even used the word balance. It's a harmony, right? Work-life harmony, right? How do the two go together? Where do you find overlap? And that overlap is your synergy to work on, right?
So keeping on your topic, what weed do you admire most for its durability, determination, and adaptability?
That dandelion has stuck with me forever. And I don't know, like, that was so easy for me to come straight to when I was trying to figure out what to talk about. But the plasticity that exists within a dandelion, I'm mad at myself that I never published, that seemed like an easy paper and we just did it now. And we were looking at that when I was 5 years ago. How frustrating, right? Could have been my first publication. No, the dandelion's plasticity and that, I didn't go into it, but you can take those seeds, like that dandelion could have grown there in that trampled path over and over and over again. You take the seeds from that, put it in the wild, and it goes back to behaving like the wild plant. But it learned, right? So now if you take that seed and you put it back into that trampled plant path, right? It's gonna grow in that behavior that it needs to in order to survive. So just an amazing, like, I hate to say that the whole time I walk around, like, I was just in Ireland, right? Oh, look at the dandelions, right? You find a weed that you're constantly looking for, even on campus here. They don't do a perfect job of controlling their dandelions. So you can look and observe at the dandelions around campus. But I'm always looking at weeds. Like, I hate to say that I'm always looking down and looking at the weed species and why they exist and where they exist and why are they still there, right? So the why for me is a driver, and that dandelion has been an interesting why. And it is kind of cool. Like, it's not a weed to me anymore, right? It's a nice ornamental that coexists with grass. Yes, sir.
Yeah. How bad do you think would be not having extracurricular activities in my curriculum as a PhD, as I finish my PhD? And I'm not engaging so much in extra activities because I kept telling myself, oh, I did a lot of like internships, volunteer project, etc. in my undergrads, my master's. So now I choose to focus just like on research.
Yeah.
I do collaborate with other projects, but I'm not planning to engage in extracurricular activities.
Have you gone to any society meetings at all and
Yeah,
dared? Well, I mean, that's extracurricular, right?
Okay.
So that counts, right? Engaging in the society. My next step for would be to challenge you. Have you taken a leadership role? Have you led a section or anything within the society meeting, or did you just go and present and then turn around and walk away, right? Like the next level of engagement, sure, going to participate is one, but did you raise your hand and say, I'm gonna lead that session the next year, right? Or I'm gonna sit on this committee, right? And so that's the next step of engagement. Going is one, but engage in that level.
Yeah, I mean, I'm TAing this semester, for example, but
Great.
nothing besides like research, I'm not engaging. That's my question, like, if it's not about research, I'm not engaging. Would that be
Find
a
a
problem?
hobby.
I don't have a hobby, but
Wait, so you use your hobby, right?
I
But
think
I mean,
that's-
that's the balance, right? I love to ask in interviews, what do you do for fun, right? This isn't, you gotta have something fun. This isn't all about the job and I mean, I've challenged a lot of people. If you look at your obituary, right? When someone reads your obituary, is it gonna say that I spent 35 years working in industry doing this, this, and this, and this? Absolutely not. I don't want a single sentence about what I did at work. Right? I want it to be about how I helped people, what I did for others, right? Think about that aspect of who you are and what your values are and drive that, right? So I hate to say think about what your obituary is, but it'll ground you pretty fast about what you want that to say. Cause I know people that have like, Brian and I have mutual people. I know that we have seen their obituaries. And like, I know them as a weed scientist, that they were phenomenal. Do you know what their whole career was one sentence in their obituary, right? So don't hang everything up on your career, right? Just remember that.
I have a question. Thanks for the seminar and
Yeah.
really nice advices, many of the advices. And you were mentioned like stand out, going to conference,
Yeah.
build your network, lead a group, try to find a hobby, but then how we don't fail in like we're doing something. I lead a group, check. I organize one activity, check. How don't fall in something like, oh, I have to do this for stand.
Oh, there's no order. There is
There-
no order, but you can fail, right? You just asked about failure. I can't even tell you how many times I failed in my career. I will start with, I failed library. I failed biology 201. The first biology class I took in college, I failed. And I have a PhD in a biology science, but I failed biology. So don't learn from your failures, right? Allow yourself to fail. But there is no strict order to how it happens. Okay?
Okay.
Now might not be the right time. It might be next year, right? But don't try to do it all at once either. That's how I failed biology. I tried taking physics, chemistry, and biology all in one semester. I graduated with a class of 22. I had never studied a day of my life, and then I went to Iowa State. That was a shock. So yeah, I failed.
Sorry, but I think I didn't pronounce well the word.
Okay,
It's not,
you're okay.
it's not fail, it's fall. It's
Fall.
like, oh, like going to in a circle that we do things because we have to do things, and then it's like, oh, I have to lead a group. Oh, I already did it. Oh, I have to be part of an association. Oh, I already did it. And then it's like, then most of people then get in doing the same things, and then like it's really more hard to stand out every time. So
Oh, I see. So, yes, but you led a group. There is not gonna be a single person that has done the
Mhm.
exact same thing you have done. And what that experience did for you versus how that experience applied to the next person is very different, right? So you mentioned TAing, right? Your TA experience is different than the next TA, right? And what have you learned from TAing? What have you learned?
How can I say,
This is a safe space, I promise.
Sure.
Yes. I don't give talks unless it's safe, right? Like, so we're safe.
It was really good, like, to have more confidence on teaching, especially not being native English
Yeah.
speaker. So it was really nice to have more.
So your
confidence,
experience is different than the next TA, right?
Of course.
So that's the differentiation, right? Stand out. So don't look at it always at the highest level of something, right? Well, your experience, but what did that mean to you? Right? And that's what you have to turn around and articulate. I TA'd also. What I learned is that I did not want to teach, right? That was my experience at a TA. I was not going to be a good teacher. I did not have the patience for students. But that was my experience. He learned that he can speak English pretty good as a teacher, right? It's very different experiences, but we both can check the box that we TA'd, right? The translation is the important part, right? Think about how you translate out to what your experience is.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. So going with the analogy that we are weeds and
You all are great weeds. I hope. Be a dandelion, baby.
yeah, and that we are, it's mostly addressed for grad students right now
Yeah.
because I know a lot of them have to deal with bad advisors. So how do you deal with glyphosate people, basically? Not mine.
And how do you deal with glyphosate as a weed, right? It's resiliency, right? It goes back to be a dandelion, right? So it very much is the determination of how you react to the situation, right? Resiliency is bouncing back, right? So when you have that experience, you can sit there and wallow about it and worry and fret and let it consume you. Your resiliency comes from how you react to it, right? Your reaction.
Not only advisors, also coworkers sometimes.
Exactly. Family members, right? It can be anybody, but it's your reaction, right? Your resiliency. And when the resiliency comes from, sometimes it happens over and over again. And so then, okay, you bounce back faster. We talk about change a lot at work. That's why I quit talking about change. It's evolution, right? And so people go through change curves. You know, the change curve is the same exact curve as a grief curve, right? They match up 1-to-1. Some people, probably like myself, I can go through that change curve in a matter of seconds because I have built resiliency to what that is, right? I have enough experience, right? I've gone through enough things that I can snap right through it. I have colleagues that are still sitting on that front end of that change curve. And it might be 2 or 3 years before they get through that full curve. So awareness of where you're at is going to be important in how you navigate through it.
If we have time.
More questions. I'm good.
Yeah.
I got all night. What time is dinner? 6:30? We're good.
So as a leader, you want to protect your team for certain things, and sometimes you have to advocate. right,
Yes,
For certain
yes.
situations that should not happen. But there is gonna be always like a flashback, or there's gonna be something like some consequence for a specific action.
Mhm.
So how do you deal with that, with situations like that?
You have to consider all the parts, right? And there are some times that you have to go into battle, let's say, right? There is a book called The Art of War. Very, 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 very old book, right? The Art of War. And that is a great book that still is lessons on when you go to battle and when you do not, and what you consider going into that conversation. So add that to your list of things to read. But yes, it's a very, very old book. Oh, and I was asked to add my pets, so these are my pets. Sorry to derail the conversation. So this is Spice and Benny and Dandy Lion. That's her name, Dandy Lion, we just call her Dandy. And then this is Annabelle and this is Jack. So those are our other mini pets.
Just tiny.
So.
So it's 4:30, so if you guys have more questions, you guys can stay here and. Great, thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
I gotta say.
Pretty hard.